Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side. I shall not be moved. Therefore my heart finds peace. My being is secure in God's presence. Death has taken our beloved Jack Abbey. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence, there is lamentation. In their tears, there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, be with them. For Jack's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever, for his companionship that we shared a long life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness, and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. Adonai ro'i lo echsar bin hodeshi yarbitzeni al meimen ochot yinach aleini. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it says, the eye never has its fill of seeing. And indeed, young or old, those who depart this life never see enough of the world, never complete their tasks before they die. And how we yearned for yet another respite from the final summons. And how we yearned to have them close to us for yet another challenge in our lives, another joy, another precious moment together. God, be now with those whose hearts are broken, because whenever parting comes, it comes too soon. Console them at this hour. Be near to them when light seems distant. Sustain them, O God, until the time of healing. And as I was reading this, I was thinking how wonderful it would be to be able to hear just one more of Jack's famous stories, another time of having him just walk with us, that quiet and huge presence in our lives. An ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave and that there is strength in faith. With Job, we say, Adonai Natan. God, you gave to us a loved one who will not be forgotten for all that was good and enduring in his life, and how much of there was that was so good and enduring. We offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. So today, we begin the telling of stories, so many stories about how we knew Jack and how he enriched our lives. I think all of you know how blessed you have been that he was in your life. It seems like I've known Jack forever. Always remember his smile, his interest in other people, his kindness, his gentleness. He just that just came out of him, that sense of gentleness. You knew with a gentle soul. And it's hard for me to imagine that he even had a sharp bone in his body. Whenever I mention him to someone, and I've mentioned him to a number of people, that he was very ill and not expected to live a whole lot longer, they would always say, what a kind, gentle, good man. Again and again I heard the same thing. And his very first close friend, Mark Swerdloff, said that he was just nice to be with. They'd go for a bagel and the movies, and it was just to be together. That was what it was about. But more important than anything that I can say is what his family would say. And so we start off with Joan.
It was a cold winter's night, January 30th. Okay. Okay. When I first met Jack, whom I call my huckleberry friend, at a dance at Temple Bethel in Great Neck. As the New York City singles dances listed in the New York Post were not successful, he and his friends piled into a Renault, a tiny, tiny car, and headed out east to Great Neck, a town they had never heard of. They sent one person in to check out the dance to see if $5 was worth attending. The friend came back and said, "Let's go in. There are food and pretty girls." I was at the dessert table where I will still reside, and Jack noticed me eating cookies. When he asked me to dance, I noticed Jack didn't have much hair. My grandson Zachary recently said, "You must have married Papa for his sense of humor, be- because he certainly doesn't have a lot of hair." Oh, yeah. Jack proposed 4 months later after a William Warfield concert at Queens College. We became engaged in June and married on August 26, 1962, almost 60 years ago. Jack had a great sense of humor, 99% original, rarely telling other people's jokes. He had a calm demeanor and great smile, which everyone noticed. He was the best storyteller one ever knew and the best husband anyone could have. Now, Jack's favorite topic was the Bronx. Lately, he always wore his Bronx hat whenever we would go out, and he would meet lots of Long Islanders who originated in the Bronx. And then they would talk over the Bronx, so that was a pleasure for him. Jack was a Bronx boy, and from all the stories he told over and over, I felt I was a Bronx girl, even though I grew up in Bayside. The Bronx was very colorful, with lots of action, and Bayside was quiet with no action. I was always jealous of his life because it was so much more interesting. Well, you often visited his neighborhood on Minford Place in the South Bronx, and I felt like I knew every friend and every block, and the Jennings Street Market where he and his mom would shop. Growing up, Jack would tell friends he lived elsewhere, as he didn't want them to know he was poor. In 2000, we visited his junior high, Herman Ritter, and the custodian showed us everything and even climbed a ladder to the roof with Jack so Jack could get a view of the neighborhood from up high. One of our favorite stories was cutting kindergarten. His teacher told the class, if you come to kindergarten late, don't bother to come. And Jack's mother left him at school and ran up to the door, but it was locked. He didn't know what to do. So on his own, he decided to go to the playground and spend 2 hours on the swings and slides and monkeys bars. It was boring as he had no one to play with. Then he figured class was over and he'd go back in line and just and not be noticed by the teacher or his mother. But when he got there, he saw his mom and the teacher talking, and he was caught cutting kindergarten. They were laughing, and Jack put up his hands and said, "I'm guilty." From cutting kindergarten, he went to Hunter College at night for 8 years and graduated in 1967. Jack only knew Yiddish when he began school, and he needed tutoring at home to Learn English. His Yiddish was very useful whenever we visited Israel and saw his Hasidic relatives who only spoke Yiddish. One of Jack's favorite jobs was being a Western Union telegraph deliverer on his bike. On May 14th, 1948, Jack had a lot of telegrams to deliver to rabbis and priests. in the Bronx announcing the birth of the State of Israel. Because he wanted lots of tips, he would go to one rabbi, then he'd wait a while, and then in the same building, he'd find another worker, and he'd ask for another tip. He just kept looking for more tips. Usually it was only a nickel. When he went to deliver a telegram to a nearby church, someone told him to go to the rectory. "What's a rectory?" he asked. He walked around the back and found the priest in the rectory. "Wait a minute, son," and the priest returned with 50 cents. A very large tip. When Jack went home and showed his mother, he said, "I want to change my religion." If you want to know any story, just ask our children or our grandchildren, because they've heard the stories over and over again. Jack and I had a beautiful 60 years. I am grateful for him and the family and life we created. Thank you. Thank you.
Next is Stephen. Speak right into it.
Over it?
Yeah,
Give me a test, right?
right into it.
Okay. Today is August 14th, 2022. The last 2 years have challenged everyone. For me, despite lockdowns, masks, vaccinations, and global upset, there is a profound and beautiful part to this time. After Dad broke his hip and dementia set in, my family and I discovered new ways to be. Joy was found in the daily trip to the bagel store. There, Mom and Dad were celebrities. They knew each employee's first name, and the employees knew exactly who had the French vanilla coffee and who had the roll with butter. Dad loved the bagel store, but never ordered bagels. He wanted a roll. In good weather, sitting outside the bagel store was the main event. It was a vacation to watch the customers at HomeSense, the UPS store, or the Tex-Mex restaurant. But my favorite part was the slow walk to the car through the parking lot. Dad would comment on each car and speculate about his next vehicle purchase would be. His frugal side knew insurance was less expensive with a Mazda. His adventurous side considered a Jeep Wrangler, and his more realistic side said, maybe I won't drive anymore. Let's talk about driving. Some say that Dad was a backseat driver, and it is true that he announced every stop sign, warned when a car was too close, and loudly declared when I drove too fast. A backseat driver to some, but a co-pilot to me. When I was behind the wheel, Dad was nervous, upset, and worried. But whenever we arrived at our destination, he proclaimed, "You are a good driver, good enough to drive a cab in New York City." Those 2 years often brought us to Old Stony Brook, where Dad would nap in the car, and then he would sit on a bench, kid and dog watching. He also liked the action at the gas station. Sometimes we went on bigger adventures. We got to the ocean to watch the waves, and on occasion, we ventured to Sag Harbor to see the yachts. 6 weeks ago, we headed back to my house in Miller Place. Dad insisted I make a U-turn and pull into Brinkman's Hardware on our corner. He had to look at lawnmowers. Why he had this thing for lawnmowers, no one knows, but he insisted. I turned and parked, and with his walker, he headed to the green electric Ego mower. After inspection, he declared, "I love coming here, but these machines are too expensive." I am so glad I made that U-turn. He got that last bit of lawnmower window shopping in. This was hours before he rode in the ambulance to the hospital. One more important note, Dad was the quickest guy ever with the walker. Leaving our house in Miller Place, he would zoom down the sidewalk. Someone had to run alongside of him to be sure he didn't teeter off the walkway, and someone else had to race ahead to the car to be ready when Dad asked, "Okay, where do you want me?" Going to the eye doctor in New York City, we always parked in the same underground lot. There was no elevator to the street. While I was getting the parking ticket, Dad zoomed up the ramp with me and Mom chasing after him. Dad was a fast mover with that walker. He broke walker land records until about 2 months ago. But speedy walker or not, he spent the last weeks having lots of conversations with us, telling jokes, retelling stories, making trouble, and letting us all know that he loved us. He loved life. The last 2 years were full of challenges, and thanks to Dad, some adventures, some surprises, and some beautiful and new memories. Thank you.
And now Lori and Dan. Gotta speak right into it.
Right into it.
Higher.
Hi. My dad was a soft-spoken man with a magnetic presence. He was genuine, thoughtful, and very funny. In Walnut Creek, California, where Dan and I and our 2 sons, Zach and Kyle, live, Jack met many of our neighbors before we even did. My parents were in California for 6 months in 2005, helping take care of Zach, a toddler at the time, while I had a difficult pregnancy and birth with Kyle. Zach became Jack's sidekick, as they would go for frequent walks around our block and up to the local pool. They met many neighbors who have since become good friends of both him and ours. He was dubbed the mayor of Gordon Road. Dan jokes that he was known as Jack's son-in-law before they ever learned that his name was Dan. In New York, growing up, my parents had a closet door that we were measured on since before we can remember. Jack made it a point to get nieces, nephews, cousins, aunts, uncles measured on the door, even a few friends. It became a ritual and a time capsule. Most people my dad would measure grew taller. We watched Zach go from knee-high to 6'3". Some who were measured grew shorter. Jack himself was started at 5'10", and in most recent years measured 5'5". Jack would write little notes on the doors such as, David, age 5, 3 foot 10 inches, very naughty at times. As handsome as they come, can read any material, very smart in kindergarten. Stephen Abbey, age 10, 4 foot 10 inches tall, 5th grade, teacher, Mrs. Trachtenberg, has subscription to Dynamite, a child's magazine, for a year, has new carpeting in his room, lost lower cuspid, plays the clarinet. Stephen Abbey, age 11, has another subscription to Dynamite, quit clarinet, has lots of posters, wears glasses, received his date for his bar mitzvah. There's been much history captured on this simple door. My parents did some work on their house a few years ago, and they replaced all of the downstairs doors, but they made sure that this one was not thrown away. On the outside of the door, my mom wrote, "Save this door. Put in garage. Very valuable." They've stored it safely in the attic, but now we brought it down for display in Stony Brook, so if you come by this afternoon, you can look for your name on the door. My dad has always been a storyteller. When we were young, Stephen, David, and I had a Sunday morning routine of crawling under the covers of my parents' bed and waiting at the bottom by my dad's feet until he pretended to be surprised by finding us there. Sometimes he would acknowledge us right away, and sometimes we'd sweat it out a while, trying not to giggle. Once he said, "Who is in my bed?" we could all jump up and gather around him, and he would start to read comics for us, and he'd tell us some of his childhood stories, be it working on a chicken farm and having a hen lay an egg in his bed, or when he was a waiter in the Catskills, dropping a hot potato down a guest's shirt. Or dress, I should say. He told us how his family drove out to Southern California in their own car to make a new life in the mid-1930s, but things didn't quite work out, and they came back 2 years later on a bus. Something always went wrong. He was self-deprecating and endearing. He expressed how he always felt dumb and he wasn't very good at reading or writing. We know now he was most likely dyslexic, but back then he was just labeled a poor student. Being both a poor student and a poor child was very much how he saw himself. I think his challenges were a gift. He became the best oral storyteller that I know. And when they were younger, during our many visits, Zach and Kyle would take turns sleeping next to Papa to hear stories before going to bed. Fortunately, in the last decade, my mom has been recording his stories. And I've watched a whole bunch of videos this past week, and I feel like he's still with us. It is a joy to watch. Over the last month and a half of his life, my dad was in the hospital. We initially thought it would be a short stay, but he was quickly thrown onto a conveyor belt of medical setbacks and treatments, one following the other, and he could not get off of it. During this time, the family gathered around him daily. When his head was somewhat clear, he could still tell stories, and he would ask for details about how everyone was doing, including friends and relatives from both coasts. During the last week and a half of his life, all we wanted was for him to be at peace. At times he would get agitated, and the medicines weren't always effective. So we found our own ways to calm him down. One afternoon, we played the entire soundtrack of Fiddler on the Roof. While David and Stephen were holding hands with him, the song To Life, L'Chaim came on. Papa, with his eyes closed, raised all of their hands together, and emphatically moved them to the beat of the music, L'chaim, L'chaim, to life. And then he gave a small smile and settled down for a nap. I just have so many wonderful memories of my dad. He will always be with me.
David?
Hi, good morning. Okay. Thank you. That's good. So, it's good. I was gonna say it's good to see you all today, but I just want to say, not for a good occasion, but I want to thank you all for attending, because you being here to say goodbye to my father, Jack, it means so much to my family. It means so much to us, because we just loved him so much. We still do. I don't have a lot of great stories like my sister and brother might have, but I just want to talk about what a great father he was to all of us. He was always there with us, whether we had, when we had problems, like when our car would break down, he would come rescue us. If we had a problem with like a government bureaucracy or a university, he would know how to fight it, and he would guide us through that. And he would just give us wise advice about life. Excuse me. So my parents, mom and dad, have been married just shy of 60 years. As my mother said, just a couple weeks away would be 60th anniversary, so we'll chalk it up to 60 years. They had such love for each other, but they weren't necessarily attached at the hip. My mother loves theater. She still loves theater. And she would go on her own or with some friends into Manhattan, daytime, nighttime, it didn't really matter. And Dad didn't really worry about her because he knew Mom was fine. And Dad would just stay home under the covers where he was very comfortable and watch television. Or he'd work around the house or work on cars and maybe even mow the lawn. Right? We had a mower. To me, he showed so much love and instilled the honest and dedicated work effort that I have. He helped me get my first job on my 12th birthday, delivering Newsday, the local newspaper. And every Sunday, you might know the newspaper's really heavy, so I couldn't carry them all with my bicycle. So he would drive me on the Newsday route, and every Sunday we were up 6, 7 o'clock delivering. But then we had a treat afterwards, because Friendly's ice cream store had a Sunday special. So I took Dad to Friendly's, my treat, and we both had pancakes and coffee. So we both love drinking coffee. So we made sure we stayed to get our money's worth with the coffee. Dad had a great career at the Social Security Administration. He never or rarely missed a day of overtime. I mean, that was his thing, making money for the family, providing for us. And he always advised my siblings and I to get jobs that were secure, like civil service jobs with a pension, and that's definitely worked out. In recent years, my dad and we did a couple of trips. One of the most memorable trips, I happen to like to go to Chicago, and I wanted to share my love of it with Dad, but I also like trains. So I said, Dad, let's go to Chicago by train, by Amtrak. And that's, if everyone knows, that's a long ride. It's about 18 hours. And Dad and I are both pretty frugal, so we weren't buying any sleeper cars. So we sat in coach for 18 hours, and after we got there, my dad said, never again, because he had lifelong back problems. So luckily I had not bought a return ticket. We flew home, so it was much better. But we had a great week in Chicago exploring. Then more locally, Dad loved New York City, so a couple things we did. We went down to Coney Island. He loved Coney Island. I know he's taking the grandkids there. Sometimes the subway system runs vintage trains, especially during the holiday season. So Dad went to go with me on that, and he loved riding the vintage trains. And he loved how some of the people who ride on those trains are such hardcore rail enthusiasts that they know every little like nut and bolt on the train. They know if there's a flat spot on the wheel. And he would always say, "Wow, those guys are amazing. They know so much." So I enjoyed that time with Dad. And Mom came with us too sometimes. On another note, my dad was not flashy at all. He was not into materialism at all. He provided for the family. We didn't starve. We did fine. And he just had a great love of life. He had a great smile, as others have alluded to. And that smile just said, without saying it, I'm a nice guy. Dad's a nice man. He's very approachable. He would approach people. He loved talking to children. Loved talking to kids, and my friends, some of them are here, they often asked about him. And he was a great guy. But the last 6 weeks, when Dad was in the hospital, it's been particularly tough for us to witness. Definitely some highlights for sure, as Stephen and Lori have talked about. But it was difficult, to be honest with you. But we went every day. All of us went every day. And we are glad that he's finally at peace. And Dad, I love you so much, and I miss you, and thank you. Thank you for everything.
And finally, Bill.
Hello. This is a sad, happy day. It is an honor to be here. It is a privilege to speak this morning about Jack. Jack's long life well lived. Well, the long part is, for the most part, out of our control. But the well-lived part is something that we can at least attempt to do. And that way, Jack was an inspiration. Here are some lessons I learned from Jack, about a life well lived. Laugh often. Eat well, only a little salt. Drink lots of water. Dance. Even with his walker, Jack, upon arrival, usually danced in our driveway. Tell stories, many, 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 many stories. Be helpful, not bossy. Though truth be told, Jack did supervise every one of our home improvement projects. A life well lived. Squeeze the cheeks of as many children as you can. Then talk to them. Then listen. Jack was interested. Have manners. Say please and thank you. Admit when you don't know something. Work hard. Okay, it seemed Jack worked really hard from the get-go. Did he really have all those jobs as a kid? Every time we sat down to eat, he'd tell us about another job he had as a kid. Shoe shiner, chicken tender, numbers runner, which I thought was an Italian thing, but apparently not exclusively. Singing waiter, grocery deliverer, butcher's assistant, sweater size labeler, telegram deliverer, street singer, and there were many more. Jack was a hard worker from the get-go. A life well lived. Don't be a hater. Give everybody at least 2 chances. He said being poor is not a sin, being lazy is. Well, I think my mother said that, but Jack would have agreed. Share. Pet the animals, use nicknames, respect traffic laws, take vacations, vote. Sing songs of all genres, sometimes in Yiddish. In the past weeks, we heard Shake Your Booty, Apple Blossom Time, Sunrise, Sunset, and more. Counsel your children, offer advice, guidance, and sometimes money. Travel as far as you need to see your grandchildren. Worry about the job security of your sons-in-law. Have a backup plan. A life well lived. Even when you're mixed up, see clearly. You can see clearly even with one eye. Marry the love of your life. Stay in love 60 years. Ask questions, say hello to the people at the next table, in the row behind you, and in Costco. Attend parties. Come early, stay late. Be real about where you came from, proud of where you got to. So there you have it. Some lessons from a long, well-lived life. Jack's was a long life well lived. We can't control the long part, but with Jack's inspiration, we might give the well-lived part our best shot. Thank you, Jack.
When David said that Jack shared so much love with him and he instilled his dedication to the work effort. When Laurie says that he was a great storyteller and that he obviously loved children. And Joan and Jack enjoyed 60 years of a beautiful, beautiful marriage about which she said he was the best husband that anybody could have. And when Stephen told about his dad with such great love, and Bill told us how much he lived a life and how well he lived his life with a lot of inspiring stories and messages. All of this shows how clearly that you know how blessed you were for having him in your life. But I also want you to know how much you surely must have meant to his life. Imagine what it meant to him, Joan, to share 60 years with you, and how much that meant to him, and how much that enriched his life. In fact, it made his life. Nobody could show so much caring to their children and their sons-in-law and their grandchildren without it being returned. You showed him how much you loved him. You took him out to the hardware store, one of the great places for men. Every man loves a hardware store, and Jack was no exception. And the bagel shop, where everybody knew him. And you did all of these things, and that meant the world to him. Imagine being able to do that with your son and have your son want to do that. And all those trips to California. I mean, he didn't go to California just to go to California. He went to see you and to enjoy being with you and with your family, and what you must have meant to him to do that. And Jack, who didn't often go to shows with Joan, went out to California. So you enriched his life. You gave him so much of what it was. He told you all these wonderful stories, but you must have been a willing listener and a joyous listener. And whenever I saw him, he had this wonderful smile and this wonderful way about him. Gentle, kind, a real blessing to all of us who knew him. All of us were so fortunate. We now pause for a moment of silent meditation and remembrance. God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures. As you, O God, endure forever, we see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is the dwelling place of your love and glory. Interment will be following this service at Wellwood Cemetery, and Shiva is at Jones House at 7 Phoenix Court here in Stony Brook, beginning with after the cemetery today. Rabbi Shidlovsky will lead a minyan at 2:30. And on Monday and Tuesday from 3 to 5 and 7 to 9 p.m. Any donations in Jack's memory that you wish to make should be to the Long Island State Veterans Home, the Jewish National Fund, or Hadassah. Please rise for El Molei Rachamim. Il Molei Rachamim, Shochein Bamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kedoshim Etorim Kazohar Rakia Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Yaakov Ben Shlomo Vasara, Shehalach La'olamo, Bala Rachamim, Yastirehu B'Seter Kanafav L'Olamim, Vayitzror b'tzror ha'chayim et nishmato. Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Jack Abbey, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.